We're going to head now to CBS News congressional correspondent Nancy Cortez, who's with the Clinton campaign right there in Miami. So, Nancy, I'm curious what the reaction was from there in the room when they debuted their Democratic ticket.
Well, Rena, I think the breaking news is that Tim Kaine is not boring, despite his insistence over the past few weeks and all the talk about how he's so boring and safe. He lit this crowd on fire, both with his facile use of the Spanish language, but also with his sunniness, with his ability to both lavish praise on Hillary Clinton and go after Donald Trump and Mike Pence, and telling what turned out to be a very compelling life story that most Americans outside of Virginia are learning for the first time. What was really fascinating is that you learned that actually he and Hillary Clinton have very similar life stories in a lot of ways. You can start to understand why he was her choice, why she felt so comfortable with him. They both grew up in the Midwest, children of fathers who had small businesses. They both went to law school at high-powered universities, Yale and Harvard, but after that, as many of their classmates were taking high-paying legal jobs, they went in the other direction, took low-paying civil rights jobs. They both married their law school sweethearts, both went into public service, both lived in the governor's mansions in Arkansas and in Virginia, both worked in the Senate. And so these are two people who have a lot in common and who seemed very happy with the choice up on that stage.
This was actually their first appearance as officially as running mates, but based on what you saw, I'm kind of curious. It's very apparent that Hillary Clinton does like him. You can just see her light up. But how is this dynamic going to unfold on the campaign trail, do you think?
Well, I think that, there's been a lot of talk about how this has been kind of a downer of an election. You've got Hillary Clinton really going after Donald Trump and him going after her. And so I think Tim Kaine's job is to be a sunny presence in a lot of ways. He talked on the stage about how he's an optimist, and frankly, he's got a smile that practically didn't leave his face the entire time. That's sort of how he's known in the halls of the Senate as well. And he talked about the fact that his mother said to him, Tim, you can either do good or you can be good, and if you want to do right, you want to be right, then be a pessimist, but if you want to do right, then be an optimist. And he said that's what he's been ever since. So I think he's there to bring some happiness, some uplift to the ticket, and he's also there to praise a presidential candidate in Hillary Clinton who has been, Democrats believe, under siege for the better part of a year, first by her Democratic opponent Bernie Sanders and then by the Republican apparatus. So he's kind of that character witness to say, here's a woman who cares about young people. Here's a woman who dedicates her life to public service. And I think, interestingly, Rena, he really made the case for why it is important to have a public service background in a year where insiders are most certainly out. Donald Trump has been calling the two of them a pair of career politicians, which they are. But Kaine argued on the stump today that the fact that he has been a mayor, a governor, and a senator, one of only 20 people in the country who can claim that trifecta, has enabled him to see what works in government and what doesn't work and how you can adjust.
Somebody weighing in, of course, Donald Trump twisting the knife a little bit in the relationship between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, writing that Bernie Sanders supporters are furious with the choice of Tim Kaine, who represents the opposite of what Bernie stands for. Philly fight, question mark. How is this going to impact and play in the race when he's making it very clear he wants those Sanders supporters?
Well, I think he overstates the situation a bit. We haven't seen any evidence of fury yet, though certainly there will be some disappointment because there are a lot of Sanders supporters who had their hearts set on someone like Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts or Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who are more firmly planted in the liberal wing of the party. And that's why you had Kaine and Clinton making the case today, just coming out and saying Tim Kaine is a progressive. He believes in progressive values. He believes in early childhood education. He's a crusader against semi-automatic weapons. And they even released his his voting record with big progressive groups like Planned Parenthood and the Human Rights Campaign and the Brady campaign to say, look, Tim Kaine may be known as a bit more of a moderate, but he is firmly planted in the Democratic tradition, and he's going to fight for those values.
Nancy, before I let you go, I want to ask you about the WikiLeaks, the 19,000 emails that were leaked from Democratic Party officials. Okay, what can you tell us about that, Nancy, and how do you think it's going to impact the race?
Well, it certainly causes some awkwardness for the Democratic Party heading into their convention where, of course, they'd like to show that the party is unified. The most damaging emails show that there were some top officials at the Democratic National Committee, which is theoretically supposed to remain neutral in a primary election, trying to put their thumb on the scale for Hillary Clinton, worried about the threat that Bernie Sanders posed to her as he remained in the race, even after mathematically there was no way that he could overtake her. And talking about things that are sure to irritate not just Bernie Sanders, but a lot of his supporters, talking about perhaps ways that they could make his atheism an issue in the campaign in states like Kentucky. Bernie Sanders, who is Jewish, doesn't talk about his faith a lot in the trail. They thought that perhaps highlighting that could cause him some problems. And in the end, they didn't go that route. But just the fact that they were looking at things like that is going to cause some bitterness and some embarrassment at the convention next week.
Give us a preview, Nancy, the DNC, the convention next week. What are you looking forward to in the days ahead? What are you looking for in the days ahead? And how do you think that people are going to receive this ticket now that it's locked in?
Well, I think that Democrats are going to try as hard as possible to portray a vision for the country that's very different from what we saw in Cleveland last week. And it's so unusual, Rena. Typically, it's Republicans who you hear saying America is great, it's the best country on earth, there's nobody better than the United States. But right now, you hear Hillary Clinton and the Democrats sort of claiming that mantle of the champions of the American spirit, because Donald Trump so clearly came out and said that America is in crisis and that it needs him to save it. And so that's sort of a twist. Also very unusual to hear Hillary Clinton making the case here today that, it's not government or one person in government that's going to solve people's problems, that the American people need to come together and solve their own problems. Again, a rebuke of the case that Donald Trump has been making, but typically something more along the lines of what we hear from Republicans. So I think Democrats are certainly tweaking their message to create as big of a contrast as possible from what we heard from Donald Trump and other Republicans last week.
Okay, Nancy Cortez, who's on the trail with Hillary Clinton in Miami. Nancy, thank you.